Thanks, Julie. It's really nice to be asked to come and speak to this group. I've been familiar with them for quite a few years, and they have done an awful lot to help the area, particularly the Great Egg Harbor Watershed area. And so it's nice to be asked to come and talk about shorebirds, endangered shorebirds, which is what I'll be talking about. And there's several reasons I'm really interested in this New Jersey's threatened endangered shorebirds. And that's one because we have such diversity here that we're really lucky to have so many different of these birds in the pretty much in our backyard. Um, and to go out, to be able to go out not too far from home and see these, it's really quite an experience. And I'll tell you, if you ever have a chance to watch them as they go through particularly the beach nesting birds, they come and migrate, lay their eggs, raise their kids and, their chicks, and then to see them fledge when they're so imperiled, it's really it's an amazing thing to see. So for me, the opportunity to take pictures and share what I see is pretty cool. The other reason, it's to protecting our endangered species is very important. And this is the only thing I'm going to read. And it's just, to me, in a pretty clear way of stating why protecting endangered threatened species is important. Protecting endangered species is crucial for the preservation of biodiversity, maintenance of healthy ecosystems, and ensuring the long-term health of the planet and its inhabitants. So I think that says it pretty clearly. Again, we protect them to protect what we have in our backyard. For me, that's number one, but then also to help out the rest of the world by doing that. Four things I want you to listen to as we go through this. The four main reasons these birds are considered threatened or endangered are due to habitat loss, climate change, human disturbance, and predation. And a combination of those. But that's kind of the background of why these birds face the problems that they do. Now I'm going to talk about first migrating shorebirds, which primarily red knots, which are federally listed species, and then we'll go on to the beach nesting birds. If I can decide, okay, so red knots are really pretty fascinating. They're not as cute and sexy as beach nesting birds, but red knots have one of the longest migrations in the animal kingdom. They migrate, this population that goes up the East Coast migrates from the southern tip of South America to inside the Arctic Circle to breed and nest. 9,000 miles one way. They go up and do that, and then they do their nesting and then turn around and head back to South America all in the same year. The other thing that's fascinating about them is how they rely on another species to make that trek. And the other species that they rely on is horseshoe crabs, which we just happen to have the largest population on the East Coast of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay, on the Delaware Bay shore. Along with red knots, but not listed, are sanderlings, ruddy turnstones, will all pretty much migrate along with them, but just they're not threatened at this point. So what happens is red knots leave South America and start working their way up, and they're in nature, they time their migration to hit the Delaware Bay shore. They don't time it, it's just the way their migration works. To hit the Delaware Bay shore at the same time, horseshoe crabs en masse are spawning on the beaches along the Delaware Bay shore. and laying millions and millions of eggs in the top layers of the sand. Um, and that time is about mid-May through mid-June is the timing. Sometime there's about a 2-week period where it's maximum horseshoe crab spawning, and the red knots will come up here, land, and feed during the day en masse on these horseshoe crabs. And the horseshoe crab eggs are critical for their survival. For them to complete the migration, they have to more than double their body weight in order to get to the Arctic, successfully nest, successfully raise their young, and then make their way back here. And it's very interesting when something happens. It's not good news, but it's also interesting when something happens where those two don't overlap. And I'll get into that in a minute. So like I said, they'll come up here in mass. Back in this, previous to the 70s, there used to be up maybe 90,000 red knots at one time, feeding on the Delaware Bay shore. And they're down to, I think it was in the early 2022, I believe it was, they were down to about 6,300 birds. And in the Delaware Bay shore, there's a significant drop. Scientists realized that red knots rely on the horseshoe crab eggs. And I think it was the mid 80s, New Jersey did a moratorium on horseshoe crab harvesting. They were harvested as conch bait and to be used as fertilizer. Since they've stopped the harvesting, the crabs are doing better. The egg populations are doing better. Red knots, they have a long ways to go. They're population wise. They go up and down. But there's science behind it, and there are people, volunteers, there are organizations like the Littoral Society, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Cape May National Wildlife, Refuge locally, that count the horseshoe crabs, tag the horseshoe crabs to monitor their population. And there's also a group that's been netting and tagging red knots and ruddy turnstones for quite a few years. To follow their population. During their migration, there's a big group of what they call them reef spotters that are hired to look for tagged red knots in this area along the Delaware Bay shore and count the number of birds. During that couple-week period, they'll do flyovers to count the number of birds. And they'll also close off sections of beach along the Delaware Bay. And there are also groups that are building shell bag reefs to help protect the beach so that they continue to be suitable for horseshoe crab egg laying. Back to the horseshoe crabs just a second. Like I said, one great example of what happens in the early, I think it was about early 20s, that the horseshoe crabs started making, spawning in mass. They started laying their eggs, and the red knots started to hit the area, and then all of a sudden the water temperature dropped a few degrees, and it was a few degrees where it went below the point where horseshoe crabs, it shuts off their spawning activity. So they went back into the water. All these red knots are here looking for horseshoe crab eggs, and they weren't here. I mean, they picked and where they could. They flew over to the Atlantic coast to try to get different insects and organisms off the beach over there. But an awful lot of them did not, within that 2-week period, whether they have the body weight that they need or not, they're heading north. And an awful lot of them didn't have the body weight to successfully get up to and nest and then make their way back. That was the year that they dropped to 6,300 birds, which is one of the lowest on record. And then the next year they were back up to, I think it was 22,000, which is getting more to a respectable number. But then last year again, I believe it was about 18,000 they dropped down to. So there's a lot of work to be done. And again, and climate change, climate affects their prey, their nesting habitat and foraging habitat in South America are, there's human disturbance. So several of the things that interfere with their life cycle.
Lifespan is?
I don't, but I do know that there was a bird that was tagged. He was called the moonbird. He was 23 some years old, which I think is the longest on record at this point.
There's a book about that.
Yeah, it's called The Moonbird. It's a great kids book, all the kids book. And it tells the whole story, what they go through. See how this works. Now we're going to shift on to, we may not get the sound. Oyster catch. If you hear that, they're not happy that you're on. We'll shift to beach nesting birds, which are really pretty exciting, and there's something to see. And they're all that we're going to talk about are all species of special concern or threatened or endangered. Oyster catchers are a species of special concern. They breed as pairs. In the off season, when they're getting ready to migrate, they'll be in what they call patches, which is a flock of oyster catchers. It's called a patch. When they go to nest, they nest on a variety of beaches. Actually, they're sand beach is common with shells. Rocky beaches is not uncommon. They're really kind of the variety of their nesting habitat is interesting because they'll nest on higher pieces of the salt marsh up on the rack line. They'll nest right out on a clean piece of sandy beach. They'll nest, the one on the right there is on the old bridge abutment of the 152 bridge, Route 152, between Summers Point. That bird's been there we're going on 5 years now. They pick them, they have a mate, and they pair up, and I'm not sure if they stay together in the winter, but they pretty much, as long as they're both still around, still alive, they mate pretty much for life. 4 to 6 weeks, the eggs hatch. They average like 3 eggs. 4 to 6 weeks, the eggs hatch. You can see the small chicks. The parents continue to feed them, and to watch these birds be parents is incredible because one will go off. They'll take turns incubating on the nest, and then once the eggs hatch, a parent will go off and grab They feed on mussels, oysters, clams, things like that. They will go off. One will go off, get food, bring it back, and feed each one of the chicks. And the other adult will, once the chicks start walking, they will, the chicks are kind of independent, but they're going to stick with them as best they can. And you hear that peeping, the racket that they make trying to herd their kids up. Again, the chicks start getting larger. The parents will brood the chicks. That one up in the upper right is, has like, I think 2 or 3 chicks brooding underneath her. Again, the nest, the chick lower left-hand corner is on that bridge abutment. Every year it seems to have 1 chick, which is, it's not the best for the population, but it's better than no chicks. And that's surrounded by herring gull colonies. So herring gulls it's not the best place to choose, but that's what they choose. And then on the right is a salt marsh. Right behind our picture is a nest. One of the oyster catchers you can see the rack where they would nest. And again, just, there's something to watch. The chicks very much stick together from when they're young to when they're getting older, lower left. And the goal for people that monitor these and try to help them, get through the nesting period is to watch them, to see them fledge. And the one in the upper right-hand corner is the bridge chick last year, fledging. And then And then again, they get together in the fall and many head south. There's a flock, there are like three flocks in New Jersey, three patches in New Jersey that will stick here through the winter. The one picture on the lower right is in North End Ocean City, and it's, that ranges from 30 some birds up to 130 some birds. It'll just hang out all. Now the star of the show. Oh, we'll go with this. The star of the show are piping plovers, which are federally threatened state or federally listed state threatened. Um, there's only like, I believe it's about 8,400 birds in the world. And there's about 5,000 on the East Coast. And I think we had, I have the numbers here, but we had close to 100 pairs, I think 84 pairs this past year, which was the lowest since they've been keeping records in 1987. So piping plovers definitely, at least in New Jersey, are not on a positive trend. Massachusetts, for whatever reason, they're doing pretty well up there. But piping plovers can be found along our sandy coastal beaches, the Central Plains, along some of the ponds and rivers, and then up into the Great Lakes. Again, with the greatest numbers on the East Coast. This is just an interesting habit that they have. It's called foot trembling. The plover will walk along where it's moist and shake their foot in the sand, and that forces insects or isopods, worms up to the surface, and then they'll grab it, which is kind of cool to watch. Piping plovers, they feed along the intertidal zone. You'll see them more as individuals than, like sanderlings that are about the same size, but you'll see, maybe hundreds of sanderlings at one time right at the water's edge. Piping plovers are a little bit further back, and generally one or with a mate, one or two, three. They are not a large flock. They nest individually. They nest on beaches, sandy beaches. And there's a lot of habitat in New Jersey they could nest in, but most of it's developed. So they're limited by that. They are site specific, they have a strong site fidelity. Same with the oyster catchers. They will come back to the same area year after year after year. And plovers, like oyster catchers, will often have the same mate each year, but not necessarily. If something happens, they'll get another mate. Okay, so like I said, they nest in the upper near the dunes of the beach. They spend a lot of time up there. So they're between the intertidal zone and up in the sand. Nesting around where the grasses are. The male will do a scrape in the sand. The male will do, a lot of scrapes in the sand until the female is happy with it. And it could take like 5 to 10 days. And then they go through their mating rituals and stuff. But eventually the female will be happy. They have a scrape that they call, they'll put shells, they'll line it with shells, and that becomes a viable spot for nests generally. And they typically will lay 4 eggs, each group. One of the birds will go down to the water's edge and feed, while the other one's incubating, and they're real tight about that. They will take turns. The other one won't leave until the other one comes back. It's interesting in New Jersey when they ban the people within the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife Non-Game Endangered Species Program will ban birds once in a while when they get the opportunity. And in New Jersey, they name the birds, which is kind of interesting. You kind of get more attached to them. But this is these were my introduction to piping plovers back in 2019. That's Danny on the left and Beans on the right. I watched them and then saw. I never did see their eggs, but I saw the chicks once they hatched. They initially had four, and they spent. It was just amazing to watch how they raise their chicks. The chicks, piping plovers, are precocial, which means when they hatch, within a day, they're out looking for food themselves. The adults don't feed them, but the adults do everything else that you can possibly imagine, as far as like showing them to the water's edge, showing them what to avoid, keeping away from ghost crabs and stuff like that. And often the adults will get in between ghost crabs and the chicks. The first week of a chick's life, it's like a cotton ball on toothpicks. And, it's a horrible thing, but ghost crabs can and have been known to grab them and take them down into their burrow. But again, the parents will do everything they can to, get them down to the water's edge, show them where to eat. The chicks will run around like crazy, and the parents will be there. The chicks have this, and the adults too have this innate ability. They often are looking up in the sky and looking at predators. Again, down by the water feeding, in the evening or whenever, protecting, brooding their chicks. They kind of, even when they're older, they kind of squeeze under the adults for warmth and protection. It was interesting this past year. Well, for the last 2 years, piping plovers have this site fidelity, so they go back to the same spot year after year after year. But if for some reason that spot isn't available, they go someplace else. And in 2 years ago, for the first time in a long time, a pair nested on 16th Street in Ocean City, right in the dunes, which is difficult because when they nest, the chicks hatch, they have to feed themselves. They have to get to the water's edge to get food. And 16th Street is a popular spot, like much of Ocean City. And they have a very difficult time getting down to the water's edge. That's where Rhonda and her family, Hannah, Lily, and Kevin spent day, and a lot of other volunteers came in and helped out, just trying to educate the public, trying to give there were 4 chicks, give them a chance to survive. Unfortunately, I think they were around for a few weeks. I was not here when we through that part and really did miss it, but none of the 4 chicks survived. Well, I know there was a fox den 5 blocks away, which is brutal. And laughing gulls are an issue, crows are an issue, dogs are an issue. But again, and then so this past year, the season was kind of winding down, and Kevin, Rhonda's husband, was riding his bike on the boardwalk. And because he was familiar the year before, he heard a peep, and he had become familiar with plovers. It's a distinct peep. And so he gets down to like 4th Street in Ocean City, hears this peep, gets out, gets off his bike and goes out and looks, and he sees, I think it was both adults were still there, and there was a chick. And again, this is one of those stories like, yeah, but how's it going to eat? It's a sad thing. People that were walking down the beach were fascinated. Again, the state's technicians worked during the day. Rhonda and her family were out in the morning and evening, talking to the public. I was out there as much as I could be, talking to the public, and the public was fascinated by this. But again, there was a drop off at the end of the fence there. And then I'll show you another picture that unfortunately, after 4 days, the chick just passed away, and it's assumed that it starved. But the effort that was put out was incredible. So with piping plovers, you have habitat loss, historic habitat loss. You have human disturbance, and this is the dunes where that chick was living and doing okay. But then this is what it had to go through. The umbrellas to get down to the water to feed, and that wasn't real good. The next picture is a laughing gull that, you know, would continuously harass the chicks. And they've been known to grab them. Lower left, another big predator issue, ghost crabs early on. And then this is a peregrine falcon tower that happens to be on Drag Island, which is part of this group's, you know, what overseas with a chick in it. And they're not, you know, they're also predaceous. And then the fox, this is the den that was 5 blocks from 16th Street a couple years ago. And, you know, the fox aren't native to beaches. They typically are on the mainland and, you know, historically. So they don't belong there, and they don't get along well with beach nesting birds at all. But people love fox, and, you know, it's a hard sell to say to remove, you know, to sell the idea of removing them. So, you know, there's a lot of effort to try to protect these birds. The volunteers, you know, we put a lot of time. The state fish and game hires seasonal technicians. They're out surveying not only plovers but all the beach nesting birds. And so they're surveying, counting, you know, weekly. Down lower left corner, they're putting up a fence. You know, we're going to herd a couple of plover chicks into the fence and tag them, and they, you know, when they can, they will tag the chicks and then release them, which is an amazing thing to see. And the other neat thing is, I mean, it really helps to be able to see a bird come in the following year and it's got a tag on it, so you know the history of the bird. The other thing so for management, the public education's huge. In the upper left corner, that's at Corson's Inlet, where they put, a few years ago, they did put a fence off. They closed the section so you couldn't walk all the way around. And there was that's where Danny and Beans had a family of chicks. And they had clear access down to the water's edge, and they did pretty well. The other amazing thing about this area was to see, because it was protected, the people were not in there, all the terrapins that would, you know, peep their heads up, look up and down the beach, and then feel comfortable and run up the beach into the dunes. Half hour later, you know, they'd laid their eggs and come back out. The two pictures to the right, they're the technicians putting in exclosures, which is a fence that they will use sometimes. It's a fenced-in area around a nest. And they have to do it really quick, because you can see in the right picture, there's a nest there, and there are two parents, two plover adults in the foreground, you know, kind of like, hurry up here, you know, let's get moving. And then lower left is public education. It's a park ranger out at, or park maintenance guy that spends a lot of time talking with the public about piping plovers. And the center picture is a fence on Malibu Beach, which is an amazing spot, because one side of the fence you have dogs running all over the place off leashes, and the other side you'll have several different birds nesting. And the picture on the right, it's hard to see, but that's an exclosure with a wildlife camera in it, and was put in over a nest. And the problem with those is, like, peregrine falcons know that if there's an exclosure there, that there are adult birds there. Fox have gotten good enough so that even though these things are buried, they've been able to get into them. So they're really, you know, there's a lot that they're trying to do to get them to work. They're hesitant, I think, more so than they have been, to use them. And, you know, again, in New Jersey, predation is a big issue. But once in a while you get lucky. This is at Malibu Beach, where there's you know, and if you spend any time out there and you see all the dogs that can't read the no dog signs and will run right through the fence, and you have, you know, but to watch 4 chicks grow up, and unfortunately 3 of them didn't grow to fledge, but this one fledged, and that's pretty neat thing to see. And unfortunately, plovers, like I said, they're on the downtrend. The scientists say they need to have like an average of 1.5 or better fledglings per nest in order for their population to get stronger. Their average this year, it was the lowest average ever, and it was like 0.52. So when you're working with them to see one fledge, it's awesome, but you know that in the back of your mind that they need more than that. So the next bird, state endangered bird are black skimmers. I don't know if you folks have seen these, but these are really interesting. They're a colonial nesting bird. There are now only 3 colonies left in New Jersey. Historically, there have been 8, 9, 10, 11. Up until 3 years ago, there was a huge colony at Seaview Marina, right up from Dog Beach. But between the change in the habitat, and there was all the eggs were wiped out by predation. It's not 100% clear what did it, but they're not there anymore. They've kind of moved out. Like I said, they say their numbers are okay, but they're down to 3 colonies, and one, to see how easy it is for one to get wiped out for this season, that's a little bit scary. They're really interesting. They're feeding by touch more than sight. That lower jaw goes along as they're flying along in the water. When they hit a minnow, automatically close, snap their head back, and that's their food. When they're born, their beaks are the same size. As they mature, the lower beak is longer than the upper beak. And it's really funny to watch the fledglings learn how to do this feed, because half the time they hit the sand with their beak and they flop. Oh, it's interesting. But again, very good parents in the colony. And then in the fall, they all sort of get together at a few different spots and then head south. They all fly south. Same with plovers. Plovers will migrate south for the winter. Least terns, really interesting bird, but a bird that's not doing real well numbers wise. That they nest solely on sandy beaches. Again, their colonies can be wiped out by early season flood tide, and predation. But to watch them is cool. The males will do this. They have this mating ritual. Well, they'll fly in with a fish. They'll offer it to the female. There's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes the female will act like, yeah, I'm going to take it, and then immediately pull away. And it's kind of cool to watch. And, they're nesting out on the open beach. So things like loose dogs running around, and kids, people, are definitely a threat. I don't know if I may have skipped it, but one of the things that the state does with some volunteer help, they put what they call symbolic fencing around wherever a nest has been laid, or where there's a pair that looks like they're going to nest of any of these protected birds. They'll put this symbolic fencing around with signs that say beach nesting bird area. And when you see that, the key is just to stay out of that area. And they generally don't, unless it's state park, close off entire sections of the beach, like you can't get to the water. They're just trying to provide some habitat for the birds, a safe spot for the eggs that go through that process. And then this is a least term chick. One more sound. Again, if you get close to them, never. Anyway, they make a lot of noise. They will fly right at you, and they've been known to hit your head or hat.
They're like the dive bombers.
Oh, they do. They terribly. And you've seen when they feed, they call them a lot of people call them strikers. They'll go over a creek or something, hover, and when they see the fish they want, they will absolutely drop into the water and strike what's down there and fly off. And other people say they were called strikers because they will strike you if you get too close to their chicks or their nests. So these are royal terns. They're more recent into New Jersey. They're not protected. I mean, they're protected as a migrating bird, but they're not on state or federal list. Oh, my audio was off. Oh, you know what? Maybe I need this one. How's that?
Now it's echoing real bad.
I hear that. Better? Better?
Got a thumbs up from Bill.
Okay. These are great birds to see as they're migrating south. Sounds good. Thanks, Ron. As they're migrating, and they're starting now to have a colony in New Jersey, which is really exciting. And then they're common terns, which will nest. They're a little bit larger. Least terns are the smallest of the terns. Common terns will nest out on the marsh, usually around where oyster catchers would nest on the marsh. They'll nest on the beach along with least terns and skimmers. They're pretty. They'll take advantage of whatever habitat they like. Now, one of the nice things that's going on in New Jersey is the development of this island called Horseshoe Island. It's like a diamond in the rough. This is off a little beach, is right behind it. North of it is Holgate, south of it is Brigantine. And I think it was 1917 it first emerged, as a barrier island. And documented breeding was first, breeding birds was first documented in the 2021. There's 7 listed birds that there's 50 birds that utilize this island for migration, resting, or nesting. There are 7 listed birds, 5 state, 2 federal, that nest on this island. Last year was the first piping plover that nested on it. The largest skimmer colony is on this island in the state. The northernmost colony of royal tern is on this island. And I've never been there. It's pretty well protected by the state. They've been able to regulate it so they can keep boaters off it. And it really is, going back in time, what a barrier island should look like. The problem, of course, is that it's a barrier island and it's going to do what untouched barrier islands do. And that is come and go. It shift a little bit, a decent storm, it could be gone. But for the time being, the state folks are loving it. And, the birding folks, not just state, but conserve wildlife and other groups that deal with these, trying to protect them, are loving this spot. It really is a gem called Horseshoe Island. And I put this together in the winter, so I still have my last slide in it. This was a great winter to just walk around on the beach and wait for plovers to come back. There were snowy owls, there were bald eagles, purple sandpipers, dunlin. And when you talk about waiting for the plovers to come back, they've just started coming back within the last 2 weeks, which is very exciting. There are 2 that we know of, 2 pairs that are probably where they've nested in the past and probably will be again. And actually, these are this year's birds. Most of the information I got, we pretty much volunteer through the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife Endangered Non-Game Species Program through Chris Tashi Davis and Emily Heiser, both who have such a commitment to helping these birds. It's great to be able to help them out where we can. And then there are other organizations that work with them and through them. Conserve Wildlife, Cape May National Wildlife Refuge has beach nesting birds on 2 Mile Island. Wetlands Institute monitors Stone Harbor Point. And so there are a lot of different groups that work. I think I missed my slide, but the key is, for people to realize, the threat that dogs play, the threat that people play. When a chick or an adult plover that's trying to guard its chicks sees a dog on the beach, it thinks, predator. It will get up and try to have the dog go after it, leaving the chick harmless and, helpless. And, often that's a time when the chick disappears. People don't realize that, whether or not they're on a leash. I know it's hard to do, but if it's an area that, especially where that it's roped off, it's got this symbolic fencing. It's got signage. It's a place you don't take a dog and I have a dog and he loves the beach. So that, you go other places. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.